Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. If you've ever gone to the range and shot a bad group, you know what it's like to question everything. Is your scope loose? Have your shooting skills degraded? Is something wrong with your rifle? Or maybe it was just a poor group. So you shoot another group, and that one's better, but still not what you wanted. What's the problem? If you're a new shooter, you might be relieved to find out that most guns don't shoot perfect keyhole groups. Having some spread in your group, especially when starting out, is normal and to be expected. On the other hand, though, there's a good chance your rifle can shoot better than you can, meaning it's capable of producing very decent group sizes with proper handling. You may just need to become a better shooter. So, today we're going to talk about some common factors that can make your rifle inaccurate, and then we'll switch over and talk about some common shooting errors that you might be making at the range. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my first experiences trying to get comfortable with a big game rifle. One of the first times I ever really used a big game rifle was when I started hunting elk as a teenager. And when I say used a big game rifle, I never shot an elk. It was more like I showed up to elk camp. Someone gave me a 308 or a 30-06 and said, "This is sighted in at 200 yards. Here's your ammo." I would look at the box of bullets and I'd look at my drops on the back of the bullet box. And I'd think, okay, if I'm shooting further, I'm going to have to aim a little bit higher. We would usually hunt for a couple days before I even shot the rifle. And then we would get to a point where we're so tired of not seeing any animals that we're like, okay, we need to do something fun. So then we would shoot the rifles just to make sure that they're on and just so you have some experience of what it feels like. Of course, that was somewhat uncomfortable because I was a small kid and these were big rifles, just super loud, punching me in the shoulder. And usually my confidence was less after I shot the rifle because I understood, how poor my shooting was and that I had no practice. And so then I'd think, okay, if I'm actually going to shoot an elk, I'm going to have a really good rest. And all of these things would be going through my head. But usually someone would mention the fact that elk are huge and their vital zone is giant. So you really just need to be able to hit a beach ball at 200 yards. You don't need to be all that precise. So I was hunting with a big game rifle long before I was comfortable or proficient with one. And I don't mean to knock my family or friends who I was hunting with. A lot of us were kind of new to this type of hunting. I don't know that we had a great understanding of what you might need to do to become comfortable with a rifle. And that was just our experience of going out and hunting. We were hunting far away from home. Usually it was a big effort to even get out there. That's just how we did it. And I think that's comparable to many people's experiences hunting deer or elk. Well, I didn't have much experience with big game rifles like 308s or 30-06s. I had a decent amount of experience shooting 22 long rifles. And if you've ever shot those before, there's practically no recoil. They are loud enough that you want ear protection, but they're really not bad. And it's just very easy to be precise with them because you're not afraid of any sort of kick, and you're usually not shooting them that far. All the times I had shot 22s in the past, the range was probably 25 yards max. On a short range, it's easy to feel like you're a good shooter. And despite my annual reminder that I could hardly handle a big game rifle, I felt like I was a decent shot because I would go to Boy Scout camp and spend the week at the range and shoot cards in half. And so it was easy to kind of inflate my own capability with a rifle. Shooting 22s is great, and it is a good way to build rifle shooting fundamentals, but they're generally not accepted for big game hunting. So when I was a little older, I was living on my own in Tennessee. I decided I wanted to go deer hunting, and I got my hands on an old 30-30 lever action rifle with iron sights. And I decided that I wanted to be proficient with this thing before I went out deer hunting. I wanted to make sure I understood how the sights worked, and I wanted to see what kind of group I could shoot at 100 yards. And I was used to elk hunting, where we would zero our rifles at 200 yards. In Tennessee, there were people zeroing their rifles at 50 yards because most of the shots people took while deer hunting were that close. And in my experience, I don't think I shot anything over 40 yards in Tennessee. So I take this 30-30 and I bring it to a public shooting range. And it's kind of a weird setup. It's public, so it's not regulated by any sort of range safety officer. And they have this whole sliding door setup that closes off the windows for you to shoot when someone is downrange. So that's pretty smart. The other weird thing about this range is that they had these giant corrugated steel pipes that you had to shoot through, and they were situated in a way so that you had to aim your gun downrange towards the targets, or else you would hit the steel pipe. And I think they had these in place so that it would make you focus downrange and not accidentally send a bullet over the nearby highway. It was a smart idea, but it was really a pain to shoot through because it was super loud and it kind of messed with your peripheral vision and your sense of space. And you were literally getting tunnel vision. And I found it very sort of intensifying as I'm trying to work on my skills and become a better shooter. So anyway, strange little range, but I go out and I bring my 30-30 and I got a couple different types of ammunition because I heard that was what you were supposed to do. And I started shooting. Pretty quickly, I remembered that shooting a big game rifle is not like shooting a 22. 30-30s don't have all that much recoil just based on the cartridge alone, but the rifles that are chambered for 30-30 are often small, lightweight guns. And this rifle had no butt pad whatsoever. So it was kicking like a mule. It was pretty uncomfortable. I would say it was more uncomfortable than my current 30-06 that I shoot, that is heavier and has a butt pad. Also, this was an old gun and I had iron sights. So at 100 yards, shooting with iron sights and shooting a good group is pretty tricky. And then also, since it was an old gun, it just had this long, loose trigger. And so it was a long trigger squeeze that traveled a lot from side to side. And I didn't know exactly when it was going to go off. And then it would go off, kick me in the shoulder, be super loud in that pipe. And overall, it just was an unpleasant experience. Well, I sucked it up and I started shooting some groups. And I shot a 5-shot group at 100 yards. And lo and behold, it was about 8 inches across. And I thought, that's no good because I know a deer's vitals are approximately 8 inches across. And if I want to hunt out to 100 yards, probably in a hunting scenario, I'm not going to shoot as well as I am shooting right now in a calm, rested shooting scenario. So I need to tighten this up. And I kept shooting more and more groups, and they were all a little bit low from where I was aiming. I tried to adjust the sights. Then I tried different ammo. That was confusing because I had 180 grain ammo and 150 grain ammo. And altogether, it was just a bit of an eye-opener to what my actual capability with that rifle was. Some of the things that struck me the most were that a rifle's trajectory is not laser flat and straight. I should have known this, but it just became clear as I was watching my groups. Another thing I noticed was that my barrel was heating up and changing my point of impact, and I wasn't familiar with that before going out and trying to shoot this rifle. A third thing that I noticed was just the effect of shooting fatigue. As I shot more groups, as I became more uncomfortable and more frustrated, my shooting got worse. Well, the accumulation of all of this was that I realized, first of all, I needed to practice more, and I ended up shooting more than I expected before going out and hunting. And I think that was a very good choice. The second part of that was that I limited myself ultimately to 100 yards and in. I figured if I can only shoot, a 6-inch group at 100 yards, I should not be taking shots further than that. If I do, it's just going to be luck whether I hit the deer or not. And thinking back to it now, considering how much worse I shoot in hunting situations compared to bench rest situations, I probably should have brought my maximum range in even further. So that was one of my first experiences getting comfortable and actually proficient with a big game rifle. And when I was going through that process, it really struck me that back when I was elk hunting, it would have taken me a long time to set up a shot and then execute it well on an elk. It would have had to be a perfect spot and stock situation where I saw it a long ways off, I got in close undisturbed, or the elk was undisturbed, and I was able to have a perfect rest and take my time making the shot. And even if I had some sort of opportunity to shoot an elk when I was younger, without those perfect conditions, I don't know if it would have even happened because I just wasn't comfortable and proficient with the rifle that I was using. Now, my whole experience with a 30-30 was redeemed. I went out on the first day of deer season. I shot a deer at 30 yards. It was a decent shot. The deer ran 40 yards and expired, and all was good and well. But I learned a lot from going out and practicing, and I want to talk through some of the things that could be affecting your accuracy, whether they're mistakes that you're making or issues with your rifle. Before we move on, I want to say thank you to everybody who follows this podcast. I really appreciate your support. If you don't follow this podcast, please take a moment to do that. If you would be so kind, leave me a 5-star review. All of these things will help the podcast grow, and together we will help more people get outside and into hunting. So thank you once again for your support, and let's talk about issues with your rifle. One thing you should know about shooting a rifle is that there will always be dispersion between your points of impact. And depending on the rifle, it could be more or less dispersion, but it's pretty much always going to be there. Like I talked about when I was first shooting my 30-30, I was kind of surprised at how much dispersion there was. I had shot 22 long rifles before and shot tiny little dime-sized groups at 25 yards, and I was kind of expecting the same thing from my big game rifle. But that just wasn't the case. In fact, I was having pie plate sized groups at 100 yards. So it's good to realize, especially if you're a new shooter, that this dispersion is normal. And some of it could just be the capability of the rifle. Some rifles are going to be more capable of shooting smaller groups than other rifles. Now, for most people, your rifle probably shoots better than you do, like we talked about in the intro. It probably is capable of shooting better groups than you can produce. That said, there are some different things that will affect the dispersion of the rifle. And so that's ammo. Some rifles like certain ammunitions better than others. It's build quality, whether it's the barrel or the trigger or the action or the stock. All these different components come into play to build an accurate rifle. Now, the other thing about dispersion is that the greater the distance, the greater the dispersion. And that's just because every little thing like wind or gravity is going to affect the projectile more the longer the time in flight. If you're going out and shooting a new rifle, you just need to expect some dispersion. Don't expect to shoot keyhole groups where the points of impacts are touching each other. Really, that's just an unreasonable expectation for most rifles. One thing that can really throw off your rifle's accuracy that you have control over is barrel heating. And so, if you have especially a narrow profile barrel, and you go out and you shoot multiple shots in a row, you will notice that your barrel heats up. And if it heats up too much, it changes the shape of the barrel, and you could experience a point of impact shift. So, all you have to do for this is just take a longer time between your groups. For my rifle, I have a thin sporter barrel on a 30-06. I find that usually I can shoot about 10 shots before I start to notice the barrel heat up and a point of impact shift. And then after that, I just need to wait 5 to 10 minutes in between each of my groups. And this waiting period is a good time to sit down, take a moment, regroup, and then you'll come back to the bench a better shooter. But just realize that if you shoot 15 shots, 20 shots, it's going to be different for different barrels. You might experience a point of impact shift, and then you are going to have this whole frustrating rigmarole of trying to adjust your scope to the new point of impact, but then shooting the gun again with a cooler barrel and the point of impact being where it originally was. So just be aware of that. Another factor that can impact your accuracy is the quality of your trigger. So a good trigger is going to have a medium to light break, maybe around a 3-pound pull, and it's not going to have a lot of travel forward and backwards. And it's also not going to have any travel from side to side. With that old 30-30 that I was shooting, like I said, it had a long trigger pull and the trigger was just loose. And what happens when you have a long trigger pull is that you have more time to accidentally negatively manipulate the gun. So you could accidentally pull the trigger from one side or another and then change the orientation of the gun. You could introduce torque on the gun as you're pulling the trigger. All these different small things that can really make a difference for your accuracy 100 yards or 200 yards downrange. So if you have a rifle that has a long, sloppy trigger, you are already less likely to be accurate than if you have a rifle that has a crisp, short trigger that is easy to break. Like I mentioned, ammunition can play a big difference. Some guns just like certain ammunitions, and it's hard to tell why. There are a few factors that predict whether an ammunition will be accurate or not, though. So quality ammunition will be very meticulously loaded, and there will be very little velocity difference from one cartridge to another. If you had a poor quality ammunition, you could shoot one bullet at, say, 2,900 feet per second, and then the next one gets spit out at 2,850 feet per second. And this velocity difference is going to change your point of impact downrange. Another thing is the shape of the bullet. Some bullets are going to be inherently more conducive towards accuracy than others. So finding the right ammunition for your rifle can help you become more accurate. Some rifles are picky, others are not. You may have to test a couple different boxes of ammo to find the one that's right for you. If you're experiencing poor accuracy with a rifle, another thing to check for is loose components. And the two that come to mind are action screws and also the screws attaching your scope to your gun. So when I was first shooting my 30-06 that I usually hunt with, I had this experience of going to the range and shooting a group, adjusting my scope, shooting another group, and it just didn't seem to be adjusting accurately. And I probably shot 2/3 of a box of ammunition before I realized that my scope rings were loose. as long as my scope rings were loose, I was not going to be able to match up the point of impact and point of aim in sight in my rifle. So I had to go find my scope wrench. I hadn't brought it to the range. I had to come back another day and re-sight in my rifle, and it was super frustrating. I've never made that mistake since. I always bring my scope tools. But if you are experiencing poor accuracy, it'd be worth it to take a look and see if anything's loose on your rifle. Could it be the action screws, which hold the action to your stock or to your chassis? Or could it be your scope rings or anything else that tightens down on your rifle? And likely, if you find something like that that's significantly loose, likely that's going to improve the consistency and accuracy of your gun. A final thing to look for is a fouled barrel. This just means that it's getting dirty on the inside. I don't actually clean my rifle barrel unless I am noticing decreases in accuracy. Sometimes I take that back. Sometimes I will clean it at the end of the season and then put a light layer of oil inside the barrel so that I can put it away and just not worry about it rusting. But typically during the season, I'm not going to deep clean the barrel unless I notice that my accuracy is degrading. So if you notice that for no reason your groups are opening up, you might want to think about how long it's been since you cleaned that barrel, and it may be time to give it a scrub. Now, on the flip side, if you have a new rifle, you may need to break the barrel in. And that just means you're going to need to shoot a certain number of shots before it starts to tighten up and behave consistently. So it's called barrel break-in. Sometimes it takes, 50 to 200 shots. And that's one good thing to be aware of, just in case you're trying to sight in a new rifle. If you've checked all these factors on your rifle and eliminated those variables, and you're still shooting poor groups, I hate to say it, but the problem is you. And there are a couple specific shooting errors that I know I made as a new shooter, and once I sort of worked these out, I became a much better shooter. The first one is getting a poor rest. So you go to the range and you're trying to sight in your rifle, but you are only resting your rifle under the forend, and you only have one point of contact with the bench. Well, your rifle can still move around a lot when you're shooting, and it's a much better idea to get a front and a rear rest. So you put something under the forend of the rifle, maybe a block with carpet on it or a sandbag, and then you also find something to put under the stock or the butt of the rifle. And that way you have so much more stability, and even if you are touching the rifle, you're not moving it as much, and you have fewer axes to manipulate and throw your shot off on. Now, in the field, you likely aren't going to get as great of a rest as you will when you're shooting off a bench. If you can, by all means, do that. But oftentimes you don't have enough time to set up a perfect rest, or you just don't have the materials available. However, when you're sighting in your rifle and trying to understand the capability of the gun and also perfectly match up your point of aim with your point of impact, you want as few variables as possible. So if you're at the range, always try to get a good rest while sighting in the rifle, and then you can shoot with a not so good rest when you're practicing. One thing to watch out for when you're shooting off a rest is to make sure that the barrel is not touching your rest or touching anything. This can change the harmonics of the barrel, the way that the barrel flexes and moves as the shot exits the barrel, and this can throw off your point of impact. So just make sure that the only thing touching your rest is the stock of the rifle. The next common mistake is making a poor trigger squeeze. You can have a poor trigger, and that can make it hard to shoot well, but you could also have a good trigger and squeeze the trigger poorly, and throw your shots off that way. So, a good trigger squeeze is going to be controlled, it is going to be smooth, and it's going to be straight from forward backwards. There's probably a better way to say that, but straight backwards when you are squeezing the trigger. A poor trigger squeeze, on the other hand, could be you pushing the trigger to one side or another, and therefore affecting your grip and your torque on the rifle. It could be slapping the trigger, meaning pulling it very fast and hard. And that is going to move the rifle as you are taking the shot. And that could throw off your point of impact. It could also have to do with you not knowing when the shot will go off. A lot of people talk about surprising yourself as the shot goes off. I think that's incorrect. I think the best shooters know when the shot is going to go off at the exact point in their trigger squeeze, and that may affect, how you are positioned when you break the shot. So just pay attention to your trigger squeeze. Make sure you're not slapping that trigger. Make sure you're not doing anything strange with it. And that will help you become a better shooter as well. One thing that plagues my shooting is a flinch. I am uncomfortable enough with large rifles that they make me jump. And it takes a lot of effort for me to just be relaxed and let myself get hit in the shoulder and let the explosion happen without reacting to it. And so I've gotten to a point where I can usually get over the flinch if I pay attention. But if I'm making my first shot or I'm not ready for it, I will flinch. And a flinch means that you are moving the rifle as you're making the shot, which can't be good. So try not to develop a flinch in the first place. One thing that helps me is to dry fire. And this just allows me to get familiar with where the shot is going to break so I understand it. It helps me focus on relaxing my body even as I'm pulling the trigger, which is essentially the scary part, right? And once I've dry fired a couple of times, I'm usually able to then fire a live round without flinching. So if you're having problems with flinching, try dry firing. Another thing that many people do is to shoot a lighter recoiling gun and a quieter gun, and just to use that to build your shooting mechanics, something that you're not scared of or not just reflexively reacting to. And that way you can build good shooting mechanics, you can shoot more comfortably. And then when it comes time to use your big game rifle, you can transfer those mechanics over to your big game rifle. Now, to me, part of shooting a big game rifle well is being able to manage that recoil and not flinch. So I guess you need practice with both of them. But if you're going to do a large amount of shooting, consider using something a little bit smaller and more comfortable, just so that you don't ingrain that habit of flinching in even further. Right up there with flinching is just getting tired, tense, and flustered. And I know I mentioned this already, but it is definitely something that is going to negatively impact your shooting. So I sometimes notice that at the range, it just feels intense. There's a certain amount of danger or risk involved with handling a firearm. If you're on a firing line, there's probably explosions going off next to you. And maybe I'm just overly sensitive, but it can get to me sometimes. So I like to do things like using double ear protection. That helps me not be as uncomfortable with the explosions going on. I also like to take breaks in between shooting my groups. I like to go sit down or think about something else for a moment. And this all helps me to stay focused when I'm actually shooting the gun and shoot good groups and actually be able to understand what my gun is capable of. Of course, there's a flip side to this as well, and that is you do need to practice with some intensity, but it might be a different type of intensity than you would just experience at a range. What I'm talking about is maybe you need to practice taking a shot within 10 or 15 seconds. to simulate an opportunity that you might have in the field. Or maybe you need to do some push-ups or run, 50 yards to get your heart rate up before you go prone and take a shot, just so you can once again simulate what you might actually be experiencing in the field. And if you can practice those things before you're actually in a hunting scenario, you're going to be in so much better shape at the moment of truth than if all your shooting experience is just shooting from a bench. One thing that has helped me actually is just getting used to shouldering my rifle. I noticed at some point that it felt uncomfortable every time I put my rifle to my shoulder. And I thought, well, I've got to figure this out. So part of it was adjusting the scope properly. Part of it is that my rifle just isn't the most ergonomic thing ever. But I've also been able to practice shouldering my rifle and dropping my head down to where it needs to be and then holding it static like I'm trying to make an offhand shot. And even just holding the rifle and doing this multiple days in a row and even probably building up some muscle response to that position has been helpful for me to be more steady and more comfortable. And now whenever I pull my rifle up to take a shot, it just feels like second nature. Like I've done it so much, I know exactly where everything's going to go. And when I'm in practice, I even probably have more muscle helping me to hold that heavy rifle still. So if you're uncomfortable with it, consider just getting it out of the safe and just holding it. You don't have to dry fire. You can leave the bolt open, right, to be safe, and just hold it and build that comfort and familiarity with your rifle. All right, guys, I hope this episode was helpful for you, especially if you're a new shooter or are shooting a new gun. There are so many variables to keep track of, and some are things that you just wouldn't know about. Whenever you're diagnosing this type of problem, you really need to be as methodical and almost scientific as possible. And that's one of the reasons why I stress getting a really good rest for your gun when sighting in a rifle. You want to remove as many variables as possible and isolate the ones you suspect. Realistically, I bet that 8 times out of 10, the shooter is the reason for poor groups, not the gun. The good thing is that once you start practicing, you can improve very quickly. For me, it kind of took me a while to simply not feel intimidated by the gun. But once I became more comfortable with the noise in the recoil, my shooting improved significantly. I think that's about it for today. If you have any questions, please send me a message at the Persistence Outdoors Instagram or shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com. In the meantime, plan some time to get out and shoot, and I will catch you on the next one.